Please, Snezana.
Okay, thank you very much. Laurent, very well. We're absolutely delighted to have you to talk to us.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be there too.
Yes, so welcome. And everyone, I'm sure, knows Laurent, if not in person, then about him and his work. So you're going to talk to us about Grothendieck and his particular paper about scientism.
Yes.
So I'm very much looking forward to it. He's actually one of my also favorite mathematicians, albeit not alive anymore. But I've done quite a lot of research on him. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more. So after the talk, we're going to have a lively discussion, I'm sure. If people want to ask questions, you know, there is a sort of button for a hand, or you can just raise a hand. But the thing with raising the hand, I might not be able to see all of you. So it's probably better to use the reaction. Yeah, okay. During the talk, could you mute yourself so we don't have the noise and interruptions? Thank you very much. So very much looking forward to your talk, Laurent. Over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much. So it is a pleasure to talk for all of you. So I suppose that you have all read this text by Grothendieck, at least in translation, or even better in the original French. So this text is quite short, just a few pages, and very striking. This text is about scientism. Scientism considered as a new religion. And of course, as an introduction, I have to say a few words. First, about Grothendieck as a scientist, more precisely as a mathematician. And secondly, about the relationship of Grothendieck with religion, because maybe it is not clear to everyone. So I just need to do that in order to make sure that no mistake, no misinterpretation is made. So first, of course, Grothendieck is a giant of mathematics, and so a giant of science. So many people nowadays think that Grothendieck is the most creative and the deepest mathematician of the 20th century. So some people compare the status of Grothendieck as a mathematician to the status of Einstein as a physicist. Okay, so he is as important for mathematics as Einstein is for physics. So this is just to say that, of course, it not only is a mathematician, but he is not an ordinary mathematician. He is completely exceptional, outstanding in every grounds. And of course, here a question which can be raised is whether mathematics is really part of science. So, and not only that, but I immediately have to say that Grothendieck does mathematics in a way which is very different from most mathematicians. And in fact, I will say more about that, just commenting his text. Because in fact, when you read this text, which is a criticism, an analysis, an explicitation on a criticism of scientism, if you know Grothendieck mathematics, you recognize quite many features of his way to do mathematics. And I find that especially interesting. So this means that when Grothendieck write this text, is not contradicting himself as a mathematician. It is not a new person. it is the same person who talks. Excuse me, I don't know why, but I hear many noises. Do you also have the noises?
Yes, I'm sorry. It's about people trying to, when they're getting into the room.
Ah, okay.
So in
okay,
theory,
so hopefully it will stop after some time. Okay, so this is especially important to realize the relationship between what he writes and his experience as a mathematician or his attitude to mathematical research. So this is the first thing. The second thing, which is also very important, is the relationship of Grothendieck with religion or religions in general. And here I will be, of course, because of lack of time, I will be able to say only a few words, even though, in fact, I could we could speak for hours on this subject. Because, in fact, it can be said that Grothendieck is a religious person with a deeply religious mind, and his relationship with religion is also very original, very interesting. And so I will only recall the basic facts. Grothendieck was born to Russian Jewish father and German mother coming from a Lutheran, so Protestant family. Both of them had rejected their family traditions, and they had become it can be said anarchist, certainly political activist on the far left, and his parents were very hostile, or had become very hostile to any type of religion, even more to any type of established religion, just as they were hostile to any type of political authority. Okay, so he really had in his family an anarchist teaching, no master, no God. So this is his background. But so he was born in Germany, in Berlin, in 1928. And of course, 5 years later, the Nazis came to power and his parents were in danger. So they left Germany for France. A little later, they took part in the Spanish Civil War. But the young Grothendieck remained in Germany up to 1939. So this means that for 6 years, between age 5 and 11, he was raised in Germany by a foster family. And this foster family was a family of peasants in the suburbs of Hamburg, so in northern Germany. And so this family was, on the political side, they were anti-Nazi. But it is important to know that they had a religious background. In fact, the father was or had been he had been okay, second. He had been, the father had been Protestant pastor. So religion was an important part of family life. And in fact, we don't know a lot about which type of education did he get there. For sure, the father had been a Protestant pastor. And so this means that Grothendieck certainly took something from this family. But in all these younger years, he didn't believe in God. And then Grothendieck explains that he changed his mind a few years later. So in fact, in 1939, his foster family considered that it became too dangerous for him to remain in Germany, as he was half Jewish. And they managed to send him to France. And he met again with his parents in France. He had not seen them for 6 years. But soon after that, the war broke out, and so the life became difficult. Eventually, the father of Grothendieck's father was arrested. He was deported, and eventually he died in Auschwitz in 1942. But Grothendieck remained in France together with his mother, and he went to high school, even during wartime. And then at age 15, just by chance, he heard a talk, not a lecture, but an evening talk given by a biology professor. And this biology professor just explained the story of evolution of life from the first forms of life to our time. So this was really a very general talk about, in some sense, the theory of evolution. And very strikingly, this talk had on Grothendieck the exact opposite of the effect it had on many people. I mean that many people lost faith in God because of evolution theory. But for Grothendieck, it was exactly the opposite. So Grothendieck himself writes that just listening to the history of the evolution of life, he became, in just 1 hour, completely convinced for his whole life that there is one God. So his explanation for that is the fact that the story of evolution of life appeared to him as a miracle. Not only a miracle, but an incredible series of miracles. And because of that, he was immediately convinced that there is a God. And in fact, his writing about that is also very interesting to read and very striking. He uses very striking words, and in fact, he even uses quite violent words. For instance, in this text, he explains that after, when later he became a scientist or mathematician, he heard many times people wanted to explain the evolution of life just by chance. Okay, and then he writes that for him it always looked as pure craziness. So this is really the word he uses. Okay, so then the last point I want to make about this text is that he explains that, okay, he became convinced about the existence of God at age 15, and this conviction was forever. But it was, he says, a purely intellectual opinion. It had no consequence for his life. And he didn't believe at that moment that God could care for any human person, including himself. So God was very far away. So the world had been created by God, but God didn't care about any particular being. So this means that God was somewhere in the library in some sense, but he didn't care about him. And it is only much later, let's say in the 1980s, that Grothendieck more and more convinced himself that God really cares for us. And so God became important in his life. And it can be said that the last decades of his life were deeply religious oriented. He was really looking for God, and for a God, for a personal God who was looking for him as a person. So this is his spiritual history. And so it is important to realize that in the text we are interested in today, which was written in 1971, this text is written by a man who is absolutely convinced that God does exist, but has no personal, doesn't think it is possible to have a personal relationship with God. So this is his religious position at the moment when he writes this text. Okay. Of course, when we talk about religion, there is also the question of the relationship with established religions. And on that last point, it can be said that the position of Grothendieck has never changed. So Grothendieck brought from his parents hostility to any type, in some sense, any type of institutions, and in particular, any type of established institution. So he is hostile to established religions. And this is also, of course, this is part of the background for this text. When I say that, I can add that it did not exclude that he could, this does not exclude that, for instance, already in the 1960s, so before the moment he wrote his text, for instance, I know from his daughter, Joanna, that in the family house, there was a copy of the Bible. So this means that they could read religious text. Okay, he didn't refuse to have the Bible in his house, for instance. And later on, he began to read some mystical writers. For instance, later, he read very carefully the writings of Santa Teresa de Avila. Okay, so the mystical writers. In fact, he was especially interested in mystical people, but not in institutions, religious institutions, whatever religion, for all religions. Okay, so this is the background. So by now we can begin to pay attention a little more to the text. So of course, the first striking element of the text is the title, La Nouvelle Église Universelle, the New Universal Church. So here, I suppose most of you know, but maybe not all, that the Greek word for universal is Catholic. Okay. So this means that here there is, in some sense, it is a universal church. It is almost the same meaning as Catholic Church. So here there is an element of hostility to the Catholic Church, and I think it can be related, or certainly it is a reasonable hypothesis to say that it can be related to his Protestant background. You see, both from his mother came from a Protestant family, and his foster family was also Protestant. Okay, so you see, in Protestantism, there is, okay, it was born in some sense in opposition with the established Catholic Church. And so this element of hostility, I think, so it is certainly also present in the mind of Grothendieck, and I think it is not independent from his family background. Okay. So the text consists in an introduction, which is almost 2 pages long. And then there is a list of what Grothendieck calls myths. The myths which constitute or make explicit the contents, the main beliefs of scientism according to him. I immediately want to make a few remarks about that. So the first remark is that if you begin to read this text, even in fact in translation, you see, just to prepare the talk, of course, I read the text both in the original French version and also in the English language translation, which is available to you. And even in translation, when you begin to read, it seems to me that we can be stricken by how precise, how powerful is his analysis. So it really begins with the first lines of the introduction. So here we see, I would say, a general feature of the writing of Grothendieck. So Grothendieck is in fact, I will insist on that, is a master of language. In fact, it is, maybe I can already say that in some sense, Grothendieck did not consider himself first as a mathematician. He considered himself as a writer. And so this means he has a passion for words, and he pays extreme attention to the meaning, the power, the relations of words. And in fact, I would even say that his idea of doing mathematics is in the use of words. You see, in this text, for instance, yes, at the end of the introduction, is making a distinction between what is explicit and what is implicit. And he says that the dogma, the main dogma, which make up scientism, are usually implicit. They are not spelled out. And so his exercise in this text is to make this dogma explicit. And here, the extra information I can give for those of you who don't know Grothendieck mathematics is the fact that the whole mathematics of Grothendieck are like that. In what Grothendieck has done in mathematics is exactly the same, to make explicit what was implicit before. Okay, so in fact, so he practiced that for many years as a mathematician, but later in the 1980s, he wrote about that. He wrote about his way of doing mathematics. And there he explains that for him, in some sense, the most human activity the activity which is most characteristic of us as human beings is to give names. You see, and here, in fact, when he says that because he has practiced mathematics in this way. In mathematics, Grothendieck has introduced hundreds of new notions. And what is a notion? It is a new name with a definition which makes precise what he's talking about. Okay, and when Grothendieck introduces a definition in mathematics, it means that he's putting a name, he's proposing a name for something which before had no name, and for that reason could not be told. And as it could not be told, it could not be seen. Okay, so this means that for Grothendieck, the most human activity is to give names in order to foster our understanding of reality. And not only our understanding, but our seeing. So in fact, for Grothendieck, seeing and listening, I would even say that listening comes first. Listening and seeing are the aims of the mathematical activity, and for him of any type of creativity. So Grothendieck had an extreme power, an extreme working power. He was working extremely hard, but it had to be added that this powerful working activity took place in the context of an attitude of his which was basically receptivity. You see, he did not consider himself as an active person. He considered himself as a person who had to listen and to see, who just had to pay attention to reality. Okay, and here it can be remarked that maybe this is the basic religious attitude. A religious person is a person who just thinks that he has to listen before beginning to do something. Okay, so here you can even remark that yes. So in fact, he has written many pages on this theme of listening and seeing, and as I just told, he also wrote many pages on the theme of giving names. And here, very important, I think, remarks which have to be made is that all of this have a relationship with religion. So, for instance, if you just look at the Bible, at the beginning of the Bible, when man is created, when there is a creation of first man and first woman, so then in the text, as it is written, it is said that the first thing which God does after creating man is to bring him in front of animals to see which names man will choose for the animals. So you see, this is really what happens just after the creation of human beings. Okay? And on the other hand, Grothendieck, which does not refer at all to the Bible, tells us that the most human activity is to give names. Okay, and so he also talks about listening. But for instance, also in the Bible, the basic activity is to listen. to listen to the voice of God. In fact, for instance, there is this motto in Judaism, Shema Israel, listen Israel, okay? And by the way, you see in Hebrew it is Shema Israel, but maybe you know that the most important theory of Grothendieck is a scheme theory. In French, it is Schema. So I don't know whether it is okay just by chance or not, but it is a fact. So this you see that the relationship of Grothendieck with religion, in some sense, is very deep, but it is not based on a religious education. Okay, and so I just first wanted to remark that in this text about scientism, the first dimension of that text is to make explicit what Grothendieck calls the dogma of scientism. And once again, I insist that for Grothendieck, the role of a mathematician, and more generally the role of anybody looking for truth, is to make explicit with words. It is to give names. Okay, so this means that in some sense his way of talking of writing about scientism is the same way, it is exactly the same way he did mathematics. It is not different. It is as a human being, it is the same attitude. Okay, so then if I look at this introduction, which is especially, in fact, especially interesting and in fact, very, very rich. Once again, I said that so Grothendieck does consider himself as a writer, and I said that he is really a master of language. So this means that every word is well chosen and every word is meaningful. And it is really, when you read this text, I think it is what is really needed is to read it with great care, to read it in a slow way, because the content is very rich. So Grothendieck, when he writes a sentence, this is because this sentence is necessary. Okay. Then, in this, a striking element for me, in that, an especially striking element for me in this introduction, is the fact, which appears just at the beginning, that Grothendieck uses the expression the experimental deductive method. You see, this is the first sentence of the introduction. And later on, you see that this expression appears several times. So the scientific method, the experimental method. And here it immediately raises the question, because what we can understand about, what we can know about Grothendieck's own method as a scientist is not at all experimental deductive. So Grothendieck, in some sense, is not a modern scientist. So traditionally, when we look at the history of science, so we can oppose, for instance, science as it was practiced by Greek philosophers or even by Middle Ages philosophers. And then there was modern science, beginning with Kepler, Copernicus, Galileo, and so on. And usually we consider that modern science is based on experience, and so there is a duality of experience and theoretical development. Okay, but the difference between modern science and classical science, as it was invented, especially in ancient Greece. So the difference is the fact that classical science was more pure science. Okay, people were looking for a general idea of the world, and they tried to deduce more specialized knowledge from this general idea. Whereas modern science is much more specialized, and it tries to generalize, starting from experimental results. Okay, so it is a different attitude. But here, there is a very striking and incredible fact, which is the fact that, in some sense, Grothendieck is not modern. So his way of doing mathematics deals with pure thought. So, for instance, you see, what is experience for a mathematician? So experiences are considering particular cases, considering examples, trying to generalize by considering examples. But Grothendieck did not do mathematics like that at all. In fact, Grothendieck never looked for examples. He was thinking in the most possible general way. And if you look at his text in mathematics, in fact, for instance, for young people, they are quite difficult to read. And the reason is that there are no examples. But there are no examples because Grothendieck himself was not considering examples, except possibly for completely elementary examples. So, for of course, the center of the work of Grothendieck is in so-called algebraic geometry. He had completely transformed algebraic geometry. But of course, geometry, so it has to do with geometric objects. But when you look at the work of Grothendieck, which is many thousand pages long, in this whole work, there are almost no particular geometric objects, you see. The only example he really considered is the one-dimensional line, you see, which is completely elementary. Okay, so his thought, you see, that he's thinking in a very general way. He's looking for methods, for insights, which make sense in general. So this means he's not interested in examples. He's interested in what makes sense in general. And is also mainly interested in thinking again the very basics of mathematical thinking. So, for instance, in his work in geometry, it can be considered that he changed completely the notion of point. So you see, if you think about the notion of point, you immediately conclude, okay, so this notion, so there is nothing to say about points. What is a point? Okay, so it is too poor. We cannot say anything about that. But in fact, Grothendieck sought to use the notion of point. Okay. But how can you think and use a notion of point by looking at examples? You cannot. Okay, so okay, so this means that when Grothendieck writes about the experimental deductive method or the scientific method. In some sense, he writes about something which is used by most scientists, but not by him. So he does not contradict himself. He is not rejecting, he is not criticizing what he has done before. Okay. Yes. When you read the text, you also see that there is a criticism not only of the authority of the scientific method or things like that, but there is also a criticism of the scientist, or what he calls, for instance, the so-called scientific community. And when he uses this expression, he puts it in quotes, which means that he does, in fact, he doesn't consider this is a community. But you see that already in the first paragraph of the introduction, he writes something against intellectual professions. So here, I can add an extra comment, which just to explain the background, or the implicit background of what he writes. In some sense, Grothendieck was very deeply democratic-minded. So he, in fact, of course, as a mathematician, he had become part of the establishment. And in some sense, he had become the king of mathematics. But he did not consider himself like that at all. In fact, he always considered himself as somebody of the most humble background. He felt solidarity with people who were very poor, who were not recognized by society. And he didn't like at all prominent positions. He didn't want that for himself. And when he writes about intellectual professions, in fact, he is writing against the prestige and the power and the influence which go together with higher education. In some sense, so here I am saying something quite extreme, but I will immediately tell you why in fact, it is like that. In some sense, Grothendieck is against higher education. You may say, but how is it possible? He became a mathematician, so he became part of the academic system. But in some sense, Grothendieck never studied at university level, because he went to high school, and when he was in high school, he heard about the existence of so-called length of a curve, area of a surface, volume. You see this notion. So length, surface, volume. He realized that these notions were not very well defined, and he decided to define them for himself. And he did that for 3 years while he was officially a student at university. But this means that all his time was devoted to these questions. And he didn't study, he had lectures, but he didn't follow them. So in some sense, he had no university education. He was really, as a mathematician, he was coming from nowhere. And for instance, when he arrived in the city of Nancy to begin a PhD, together with PhD advisors Dieudonné and Schwartz, So this was to begin working in so-called functional analysis. But when he arrived, he knew almost nothing. So for example, the basic notion of functional analysis is the notion of so-called Banach space. But then I remember I heard from Dieudonné that when Grothendieck arrived in Nancy, he didn't know what is a Banach space. He didn't know the very basics of knowledge in the field where he was supposed to work. And then what happened is that Dieudonné gave him a list of problems. So these were very abstract problems, which Schwartz and Dieudonné had identified that they didn't know how to solve these problems. So they gave this list to Grothendieck, and Grothendieck disappeared. And 2 months later, he came back and he had solved half of the problems. And at the end of the year, he had solved all 10 problems which were given to him. But this was completely from scratch. He was not, he never was somebody who knows. Okay, and so another piece of information I can give, but which is very striking, is that so Grothendieck had 5 children, but none of his children got higher education. So this means that they have quite, so their life is not very easy for them. They are not rich, they are quite poor. In fact, it is difficult for them to make a living. But in some sense, you see, they just followed what their father thought. In some sense, Grothendieck thought that to become, for instance, a mathematician as himself, what you needed is really to be driven to that by passion. You needed, in some sense, to be called to that. And if you are called to become a mathematician, you don't need higher education. And if you are not called to become a mathematician or any type of scientist, then there is no point in losing some years getting higher education. So this means that for him, higher education either was not necessary or it was pointless. And so for him, what appears in the text is that the real purpose of higher education is to bring you to have more power and influence. And he doesn't like that at all. So once again, he's very deeply democratic-minded. Okay, so when you read the text, you see that so he's very hostile to any type of authority. So in fact, this is one of his main of the main things he has against the scientific, the so-called scientific community, and in fact, a very striking feature. So his text, especially the introduction, is very, very striking because, in some sense, he reverses what we usually think about science, or what has been said about science for several centuries. Because science has established an authority by criticizing the principle of authority. Okay, so formerly there were traditional societies which were based on the authority, for instance, of revealed or religious text. And science tried to, or even succeeded to destroy this authority. by saying that reason is more important. We have to choose reason against respect to authority. And we have to reject dogma and choose reasoning, experience. And we have to, so in science there is debate, unlike in religion. So this is all the classical saying. And in fact, in the second paragraph of this introduction, Grothendieck reverses the situation. So what he says is that by now science has become an authority. And this authority, in some sense, is even more undisputable than previous religious authorities. So what he says is that science, after modern science, after 4 centuries of exercise, has become the opposite of what it aimed to be. It aimed to oppose reason to authority, but by now it has become an authority, and there is no more reasoning because most people don't understand at all what scientists are talking about. So here again we find is hostility to higher education. The problem of higher education is that it gives you some knowledge which other people are not able to understand. Okay, so you see, in the word he uses, there is the word indisputable. We can no more dispute the authority of science, and incomprehensible. Most people cannot understand it anymore. And not only that, but even in the realm of science, when most scientists cannot understand what most other scientists do because of specialization. So here, of course, we can say, okay, but Grothendieck mathematics are especially difficult, and even for most mathematicians, so most mathematicians will certainly consider that his mathematics are even more difficult, so in some sense are even more elitist than most mathematics. Okay, in some sense it is, for him it is a tragedy. It is not at all what he wanted. And here another important piece of information is that Grothendieck never considered himself as a specialized mathematician. He was really thinking big in mathematics. He considered himself a global mathematician. He thought that what he was doing was in some sense, at the scale of the whole of mathematics and beyond. So eventually it became so deep that, of course, if you want to understand his mathematics, you have to study them for years. Okay. By now, I want to finish with the introduction, but there is, so you see, once again, I can only say a little about everything he says, because his text is extremely rich and every word is important. But I want to say a last thing about a word which appears in the introduction, and which is, in fact, is really very, very important for him. It is the word violence. So Grothendieck, so this is near the end of the introduction, he talks about the emotional violence of a ruling elite, and here he's talking about the elite of scientists, whose privileges are being threatened. And so, in fact, this theme is very important for him in other texts he has written. The violence which can be done by scientists. So in some sense, he experienced the violence of the so-called scientific community. So in the 80s, he wrote this famous text, Récolte Semailles, which is a very harsh, which is in particular a very harsh criticism of the community of mathematicians he knows. And one of his main, one of the things he doesn't like is violence. So he experienced violence from them, violence towards him, violence towards his mathematical works, and violence towards many other people. For instance, towards young people without power, without influence. So he is extremely sensitive to that. But I would want to say more, something deeper, which is the fact that his mathematics, here I am not talking about relations with other human beings, I am talking about the content of his mathematics. So if you consider his mathematics and his way of doing mathematics, in some sense, their difference with mainstream mathematics is the fact that this is mathematics without violence. I mean that most mathematicians and most scientists in the last centuries try to for instance, to solve problems with power. Okay, so for instance, Grothendieck says they try to crack problems. Okay, and including, if needed, with brute force. In some sense, it is even valued. This is what Grothendieck calls sport mathematics. You try to do something extremely difficult, and you succeed in solving something which was considered extraordinarily difficult. So this means that there was a wall, and you have crushed this wall by force. Okay, and this is the way modern scientists, or many modern scientists, do science. And it is certainly part of the story of modern science in the last centuries. We try to solve problems and with weapons. But his way of doing mathematics is completely different. I already said a word about that. His way of doing mathematics is to listen, to see. So this means it is only to pay attention to reality as it is. It is the basic attitude of Grothendieck is passivity. He is not trying to be creative. He is not trying to do something which will impress other people. He is just listening. And he says, listening to the voice of things. And he also says that the more interesting is the voice of things, the lower it is. So this means that if we want to listen what is really interesting, the danger is noise. We have to become, in some sense, silent to be able to listen. And in fact, if you read other texts by Grothendieck, you understand that he criticized, let's say, the whole modern civilization as a whole. But his deepest criticism is that the modern world is noisy. And because it is noisy, we cannot listen. It prevents people from listening. So this means that for him, the refusal of violence is one of the most basic features, not only of his activity as a mathematician, of his way of doing mathematics, but really of his way of life. So I will give another very striking example, which maybe will, or certainly will look to you and also to me quite crazy. So this is something which happened in the last part of his life when he was living in a small village, La Serre, close to the Pyrenean mountains. And it happened sometimes, so this was told to me by his neighbor, in fact. And in fact, it happened one day that there was fire in his house. He wanted to just to get it by burning some wood, but unfortunately, maybe he used too much wood, or so that something didn't work, and so the house began to burn. Okay, and so his neighbor saw that, and immediately she called for the firemen, and the firemen arrived. And then Grothendieck tried to negotiate with them. And to negotiate what? They wanted the firemen not to stop the fire, because it would be exerting violence on the fire. The fire was there, and so you had to let it go, not to act against it. This is a natural phenomenon, after all. So you see, so the whole mathematics of Grothendieck is based on the idea of respecting reality and respecting nature. We just have to respect nature, to look at it is, and not try to correct it. For instance, even he preferred his whole house to burn than to accept violence against the fire. So it looks crazy, but he did mathematics in this way. By now there is this whole list of myths he has written. So of course I will not, I don't have time to talk about them, except for the fact just to give advice to read all of this with great care, because you see, he's once again, he's making explicit what is usually left implicit. And when he does that, is really very good. Okay, so this means that what he spells out is most important. And when we read that, I think it is very good for us to wonder, what do we think about that? So you see, his sentences are quite provocative, but do we accept that or not? What do we think about that? What do we think about? So he is trying to make explicit the content of scientism. And this, and okay, and okay, so you can look at that and think about that, but then we may wonder, why does he criticize that? In which name? So it seems to me on two grounds, two main grounds. So the first ground is truth. So Grothendieck he simply says that these myths of scientism are not true. Okay, this is explicitly written in the text. So when he says that, here I have to, we have to we can wonder what he means by truth. And in fact, so here, of course, he doesn't write at all about that in the text, but he writes, he spells out much more his idea of truth in later text, especially in text he has written in the 1980s. And here, a very, very interesting thing to know is that, so somewhere in the text, you see the expression, there is truth, there is knowledge, and there is scientific knowledge. And he criticizes the identification of these three things. Okay? But then you have to know that in later text, especially in the text whose name is La Clé des Songes, the Key of Dreams, in some sense, he explains the difference between truth, knowledge, and scientific knowledge. So for instance, at some point he says there is a big difference between knowledge and information. What is the difference? The difference is that when real knowledge is something which transforms you, whereas information is something you just hear or read or learn, but which does not transform you. So this means that the difference between knowledge and information is an inner difference. And here appears something which is extremely important for him, which is interiority. For him, what is inner is much more important than what is outer. So for instance, he also speaks about truth. And for instance, in this text, La Clé des Songes, the Key of Dreams, he uses a very personal expression, which really belongs to him. It does not appear anywhere else, even in the books by philosophers. He talks about what he calls état de vérité, state of truth. So what is state of truth? State of truth is an inner state. It is the inner state of a person who is ready to pay attention to reality. A person who is ready to listen, to see, to be receptive. So this is what he calls state of truth. So this means that for him, this state of truth, it is the real dimension of truth. For him, it is so important that, for instance, he says that mistakes are not, it is not, if you make mistake, objective mistakes, it doesn't matter. Because if you are in a state of truth, you will correct the mistakes. But it can happen that you are not in a state of truth and you say something which is objectively true, but it has no value. What has real value is the relationship which is established between your interiority and reality when you are receptive. This is real truth. So here, when you read that, you understand that for him, what really matters is life. You see, we have an idea of mathematics as something mineral. Mathematics is like a mountain. It is extremely beautiful. It is also impressive. It is difficult to get there. And we look at it, we admire it. But something very striking is that when Grothendieck speaks, when he writes about mathematics, most words about his way of doing mathematics, most words he uses belong to the vocabulary of life. For instance, he writes that he writes in some sense about the criteria of truth. How do you recognize truth? So, of course, there is exactitude. Something is objectively, for instance, you are a mathematician, you have written a proof and your proof is correct. Okay? But for him, this is degree 0 of truth. This is only the first basic dimension, but it is not at all the most important. What is the deepest criterion of truth? It is fecundity. Something is really true when it generates new knowledge, when it generates creativity. This is the real dimension of truth. And so you see that this real dimension of truth is related to life. And by now, if you come back to the text, to this text, the New Universal Church, and this criticism of scientism, in fact, you see that this criticism is spelled in the name of life. In fact, this is even the title of the group he had founded. Survivre et vivre. Vivre, it is to live. Okay, so in fact, what he criticizes is an idea of science and the practice of science which is no more life and which in some sense is against life. So, but his practice of mathematics was a living practice. And you see, I just said a few minutes ago that he talks about the need of listening to the voice of things. So this means he's talking about things as if they were living beings. So what can you say about a living being? A living being is never fully predictable. A living being can do something unexpected. Of course, human beings, but even animals, for instance. And if you consider even plants, okay, there is this huge diversity of living beings. This is incredible diversity of living beings. And here, we arrive at the second dimension, the second reason of his criticism of science, of scientism. So he says that scientism is reductive. It reduces the diversity of reality. It says that reality can be reduced, for instance, to a mathematical structure. And for him, here, what we miss is the fact that reality is incredibly rich. It is more rich than anything we can imagine, even mathematics. And this whole practice of mathematics consisting just to see how really rich is reality. Okay, this is why he says that in order to be creative, it is enough just to pay attention, just to listen, just to open our eyes. Because reality as it is waiting for us. It is waiting for us to spell it out, to make it explicit. And this is it cannot be exhausted because it is infinitely rich. And this is really something, this conviction, the sense, the feeling, the conviction that reality is inexhaustible, that it is infinitely rich. So this is at the very foundation of his relationship to the world. So in some sense, for instance, Grothendieck says that the basic of his mathematical activity, of his creative activity, is faith. But which kind of faith? In some sense, it is a pre-religious faith. It is not faith in the content of a particular religion. I call it pre-religious. What does it mean? It is a faith in the fact that the world which is given to us cannot be exhausted. It is a faith in the fact that the world is wonderfully rich. And I think we can conclude like that by realizing that in some sense, you see, in Grothendieck there is, in many respects, a primitive dimension. So you see, if you think about 20th century modern art, for instance, you can learn that people got inspiration from so-called primitive arts, which they discovered at the beginning of the 20th century. But Grothendieck also, in some sense, is a primitive person. You see, his way of doing mathematics, in some sense, is closer to what was done in ancient times than to modern mathematics. And what he has done in mathematics, in some sense, is pre-mathematical. It consists in creating theories, introducing vocabulary, to talk about things which were not considered before by other people as mathematical, because they correspond to intuitions of the mind which are there in our mind even before the invention of mathematics. They correspond to very primitive intuitions, which are pre-mathematical. And on the religious side, Grothendieck is pre-religious. In some sense, he is not a religious person. It is as if he had lived before any religion was introduced in the world. He's really like that. Okay, so I think I have already talked too much. And so once again, I just encourage you to read even this short text. So you see it is 7 pages long, so it is short, but it is really full of content, and it gives a lot. We can think a lot just trying to understand what he's saying. And of course, it is not possible to agree. When you read Grothendieck, at least my experience is that I never can fully agree with everything, but everything gives a lot to think. And everything is extremely interesting, and he goes very quickly to very deep questions. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions. So I'm going to look at raised hands. So can I just say to people, please, could you raise your hand on reactions, and then when I call you, sort of mute yourself. Okay, no questions just at the moment. I have several actually. So I can start. Thank you very much. That was really inspiring. It is very difficult, isn't it, to read Grothendieck, his non-mathematical writing as well as his mathematical writing. And there is also something that is sort of, you mentioned, there is a sort of question of self-preservation that is almost missing. In both his view, like for example, what you said about the building which went on fire, his house which went on fire, but also there is no filter, and this is what I actually particularly appreciate. There is no filter. He actually wants to say what is the truth.
Yes. Yeah.
But it doesn't have that filter of self-preservation.
Yeah. No, that is true. Yeah, but I wouldn't say that Grothendieck is difficult to read. So, for instance, if you begin to read La Clé des Songes, in some sense, the danger is that it is too easy to read. So it is quite pleasant to read, so you can read it very quickly.
Yes,
the danger is not to realize that there is a very deep meaning. So, for instance, in this text, there is, in some sense, a whole philosophy. For instance, there is a philosophy of truth, there is a philosophy of freedom, but it is not organized as a philosophy book. So here it is really needed to pay attention to what he says. Yes. And in fact, it is a very good exercise. In fact, I did it for myself a few years ago on the theme of freedom. So I just gathered everything Grothendieck writes about freedom in La Clé des Songes. And when you gather these quotations, you are very impressed because he has an idea of freedom, which once again is completely different from the modern idea of freedom. So for him, freedom is not freedom of choice.
Okay, and so there is a lot of also to do with mysticism. You mentioned that he was reading about mystics, and you know, the naming things. Actually, that is quite mystical, isn't it? And you mentioned sort of Jewish mysticism there, which is quite interesting, because obviously his father was Jewish, wasn't he?
Yeah. But both his father and his mother had, in some sense, so they were revolutionaries. Yeah. In fact, his father took part at age 15, I think, already in the 1905 revolution in Russia. So, of course, this revolution failed. So the father of Grothendieck's father got to jail for the first time at age 15. And I remember I read that during his lifetime, Grothendieck's father got to jail 17 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just because he was, okay, anywhere he lived, he was doing, he was a revolutionary by nature. And eventually he died not as a revolutionary, but as a Jew. But,
yes. But maybe that sort of bravery. I think it is very brave. You know, I must say, I remember being in Nancy in 2015, and people talking about him. He was still alive then.
He died in 2000. I think 2014.
Oh, 14. Oh, I must have been 2014 then, because he was still alive. Did you meet him?
No, I tried. In fact, I went to his village, but you see, there was not even a bell. So it was not. And of course, I didn't want to do anything. So I came in front of his house, but there was a garden, and I didn't want to cross the garden without his permission. So I just. Cried out his name, and certainly he didn't hear it. He was becoming deaf. So
okay.
Yeah, but anyway, he didn't want people to visit him. And here there is something. You see, another important point we can make, because of course everybody knows that Grothendieck lived completely alone in the last 25 years of his life. And he didn't want people to visit him. So when you say that, you may not understand why. And in fact, in La Clé des Songes, there is an element which, in some sense, made me understand why he has done that. This is the fact that he had realized, of course, as a mathematician in the 1960s and later in the 1970s when he had some militant activity, Of course, he had realized that he could be extremely influential. He could influence other people. He was charismatic. But at some point, he realized, or he thought for himself, that everyone has to follow his own inner path. So Grothendieck, at some point, he concluded that, for instance, even to try to convince other people, even with with truth, but to try to convince other people is just a noisy activity. It prevents you and it prevents other people from establishing inner silence, which is necessary for everyone to follow his inner path. So when I read that in La Clé des Songes, I understood that he didn't want people to visit him because he didn't want to influence them. He considered that to influence other people was some form of violence. He didn't want to be violent on them. He knew he was charismatic, but he didn't want to be charismatic with people. Yeah. He thought that other people also needed to look, they needed to do their own inner research for truth.
Yes, that is really fantastic. Okay, I'm going to ask other people are now asking questions. So Antonina Draga, I think, was the first one.
Thank you. Do you have me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Lafont, for your talk. It's very, very fascinating because linked mathematics with life, what is not usual. I would like to present a comment and after a question. My comment is that in 1970 and 60 and 70, near Montpellier, there was a community of non-violent peoples led by Lanza del Vasto, who was the only one Gandhi disciple, Western Gandhi disciple. And Lanza del Vasto in 1959 wrote a book, Le Quatre Fléaux, The Four Scourges, where there is this proposition. The only lack of the modern science is one person who knows it entirely. I think it's the same of what Grothendieck thought. And Lanza del Vasto, in this book, wrote an interpretation of Apocalypse 13, that's a sacred text for charging science to be an evil enterprise. It is very detailed and detailed interpretation. It's the first interpretation of a sacred text against science in modern times. So maybe there is a link between Grothendieck and this interpretation, but I don't know. But in any case, it's interesting that in this time there was very great opposition to science as building the bomb, nuclear weapons.
No, for sure.
My question is the following one. There is on YouTube a video of Grothendieck who speak to CERN, to the laboratory of a physicist of elementary particles. The title is Have We to Continue Scientific Research? His answer clearly is no. But what is the reaction by the physicist? This is my question. Thank you.
No, I don't know. Of course, I know this conference, but I wouldn't be as affirmative as you. I think that so that the title of the conference is a question, and I think it was also a question for him. And in fact, in the following years, Grothendieck himself, even though he became isolated, he didn't stop scientific research. He kept on doing mathematics. For sure, he did it in a different way, but he kept on doing mathematics. So the way I see it is that for him, nothing was obvious. And nothing was granted. So this means so he had devoted so much energy, so much time to scientific research, and at some point he wondered, but why do I do that after all? And so my interpretation is that for him it was a real question, and I think that he is right. It is a good question, and so we have fortunately the recording of the conference, and he is giving some arguments. No, in fact, what appears in the conference is that he has asked the question to many mathematicians and scientists he knew. At some point, he asked himself this question: why do you do scientific research? And then he asks the question to other people he was used to work with. And what he says is that the answers he got were very weak. So this is so this means that he considers that the answers which scientists usually give are not enough. But I don't think that that his own answer is no. It is just for him it was a real question. And once again, you can also make the question a little more precise because you see, the answer to this question is not necessarily yes or no. In fact, in my talk today, I explained that, for instance, his way of doing mathematics, so his way of doing science is not the same way as most scientists. So this means that a possible answer to that question is that we have to do science in a different way or in different ways. So for instance, his answer is certainly we have to do science in a way which is respectful of life, which is based on listening, which is based on care of reality, on attention to reality. We have to do science in a way which is not violent. And so you see, it is not an answer by yes or no. And so usually, you see, when Grothendieck considers the question, once again, he's always very careful of reality. So this means that usually he looks for all possible arguments. He doesn't want to forget some arguments. For instance, if you take this text, the Universal Church, and you read it carefully, you see that at some points, he recognizes that scientism is not without reasons. He says, no, he says there are some reasons, real reasons, good reasons for scientism. Of course, so you see, he does, of course, he is against scientism, but he tries to understand why scientism has become so powerful. Why is it so convincing? Why are most people or most scientists, why do they accept scientism? There are reasons for that. And these reasons are not completely wrong. You see, Grothendieck doesn't want to reduce reality to something which is only part of reality. So he's you see, he's general-minded, but even in his practice as a mathematician, he is extremely careful of details. For him, it is part of the attention which reality deserves. And so this means that when he considers a question, any question, any deep question, because all the questions he considered, in fact, are deep questions, the answer is not a one-line or one-word answer. The answer, in some sense, never stops. It is, for any question, you can write thousands of pages on that question, and this will only be the beginning. Because anytime you consider a deep question, this question cannot be exhausted.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Fred Nelson, I think, is the next.
Yes, thank you very much. Professor, this was a really fantastic talk. The question I had was, I believe during the later period of his life, Grothendieck, maybe it was in the 90s, he actually sort of disavowed most of his mathematical work, and said it was useless, and even, encouraged people to destroy his work. Can you comment on that?
So when he asked people he wanted people not to read anymore his work, it was later. It was in 2000 something, maybe 2007 or 8. It was later. No, I don't know how to interpret that, except possibly for the fact that once again he didn't want to be a guru. Of course, he knew that people are fascinated by Grothendieck. Sometimes we are all fascinated by Grothendieck. But he doesn't like that fascination at all.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very simple, but probably the best answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next question is from Mohammed. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Good night. Thank you very much first about this interesting presentation. I have a very tiny question. I ask if the scientism is something which could be surpassed while the science remains a science, or it is as essential to science as the structuralization itself. Whereas there is a structure, there is exclusionary violence from my perspective. The Carnevian tolerance, for example, the Carnevian tolerance in logic and in scientific frameworks remains among the scientific frameworks only. And the exclusionary violence between science and different discipline remain as it is in this Carnevian framework. Then the question, if the scientism is something which could be surpassed while the science remains science?
Yeah, very good question. But I don't know the answer, and I don't know what Grothendieck would have thought about that. Of course, he would want, in some sense, he would want science without scientism. But you could argue that people, when people do something, especially when they need to be deeply involved in something, because when you, in order to be a good scientist, you need to focus on your subject, so you also need to believe in what you do, to believe very strongly in what you do. And so it is very easy to conclude that what you do is more important than anything else. And for instance, a particular type of truth which is gotten by science is the whole truth. Because if you don't believe that, you begin to doubt.
Yeah.
So, at least on the psychological level, it is very difficult.
Okay, thank you.
You see, if we look at history, so for instance, in history, there are figures who, in some sense, are quite alike Grothendieck. So, for instance, Blaise Pascal, in the 17th century. So, Blaise Pascal was a scientist, he was a philosopher, he was a writer. He also was a religious person. So in many respects, there is some similarity between Grothendieck and Pascal. And Pascal, so he was a very important mathematician, but his life was very short. But even in his short life, in fact, at some point, he dropped science. So the same as Grothendieck. And okay, but because at some point he considered that there were things more important than science. So it is difficult to realize that science is not everything and to keep on doing science. It is an extremely difficult equilibrium.
Yeah.
Maybe a possible answer maybe can be found in the writings of Pascal. At some point, Pascal writes that we have to do. So Pascal likes to write things which are paradoxes, and so there is a sentence of Pascal saying that we should do important things as if they were not important, and not important things as if they were important. So I just, okay, so maybe it is a possible answer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we have Jeremy Gray would like to ask a question.
First of all, thank you very much for that interesting talk. I'd like to take you back to the mysticism side of him. Often when we think of mystics, we think of a blinding illumination, a sudden experience of the divine or whatever. And I suppose there are also mathematicians who are well known for having a brilliant series of insights for which the proofs are often lacking for some time. But with Grothendieck, instead, it seems to me that he had an approach which he called the rising seas, you know, yes, which was to gradually, you know, rising sea softens the nut. You don't have to crack it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wondered if this was a form, because he writes mathematics at great length, as you know. I wondered if this was, for him, the experience of, in his mathematics, of listening actively to reality, that reality is revealed to him or was revealed to him patiently, rather than in the traditional mystical way of a sudden illumination.
Yeah, but in fact, in his mathematics, there are these two elements. There is this element of patience, of continuity on the one hand, and there is also the element of sudden, unexpected events. And here, what he says is the following. It is that what we can give on our side is continuity. We can work every day. We can keep on looking for truth with the utmost attention every day. So this is continuity. This is what is needed on our side. But what is given to us, but which we cannot create by ourselves, is unexpected, sudden appearance of elements of truth. And so, in fact, for instance, in Récolter Semailles, he gives quite many examples of that. That, for instance, he was working on a subject, and he writes at some point, he was baffled by a sudden discovery. For instance, in French, he writes, j'étais sidéré. I was, so this sidéré, so this means the biggest possible form of surprise. Mm-hmm. He didn't expect that at all. It happened to him, but it was given to him because for a very long period, he had made everything he could to give himself in order to look for truth. Mm. So this means that his relationship with mathematics already in the 1950s and 1960s, in some sense, it was very close to mystical experience.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On that, can I just also mention the Claire Dessange? He also talks about that, doesn't he? So that revelation and individual kind of relationship with that each one of us have. Which is,
yes.
Okay. Aline is the next question.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So thank you also from my part for this wonderful talk. I didn't know Grothendieck, but very much impressed me his thoughts and very much on my line. So, but my question is, what would you think, how would Grothendieck have responded to science as we witnessed it in the Corona crisis? So I'm referring mainly to these predictive studies that were made in the beginning of the pandemic, like the study by Ferguson and others, which seemed so plausible, but at the same time so well threatening and in some ways also a bit fishy and dodgy. And it really struck me as how can one show that, or how can one buttress this intuition that something's a bit fishy about these studies, but then again, you have all these parameters and the mathematical models, and they seem to be plausible. So it seems to me perhaps this is something Grothendieck could have commented about. What do you think would have been his response if he could have witnessed the current crisis?
Which crisis? I didn't get. Excuse me.
The Corona crisis.
Oh, no, I don't know at all. No. No, what we know is that in the late 60s, at some point, he became very much interested by biology. He followed talks, lectures in biology. So we know that. We also know that when he was living in isolation in the last part of his life, in fact, he studied plants. So this means, you see, so his nature was really to do research, to look for truth, and he especially paid attention to living beings. But I don't know at all how he would have reacted to, for instance, to the present pandemic. No, no. What we can say is, so he was very much concerned by the problem of existence of evil. In fact, we know that in the last part of his life, he wrote tens of thousands of pages, as he had done for his whole life. And so nobody has read these pages. They are still not available. But we know that, so he has left in his house in the 70,000 pages of writings. And I have been told that on these 17,000 pages of writings, 20,000 are about the problem of existence of evil. But it seems to me that for him, the main problem, the most important problem, is not at all the existence of physical evil. The real problem is the existence of evil inside us. I mean, inside human beings. Why do we act badly? So for him, it was really the real problem. I don't think I don't think that for him, for his thoughts, illness, pain, even the existence of death, I'm not sure. For him, it was not the most important problem. And in some sense, so for his thoughts, it is completely clear that for him, pain was part of reality. And sometimes he writes about pain as something positive. So for instance, on internet, you can find a short text by a young mathematician from Iran, who had succeeded to visit Grothendieck a few years before his death. And okay, so in fact, Grothendieck was quite kind with him. Then he told Grothendieck told this young mathematician that he could write to him. And then Grothendieck told him, I shall answer you if, reading your letter, I understand that you have written it with pain. So this means that for him, for Grothendieck, you see, what is really valuable is what you do something which transforms yourself. And it cannot happen if you don't suffer. In some sense, you cannot look for truth first of all, truth inside yourself, truth about yourself. You cannot do that if you don't accept pain. So for him, I wouldn't say that pain was valuable in itself, but it means that everything valuable happens with, comes only with pain. He certainly thought that. And in fact, I remember that a mathematician who had known Grothendieck very well in the 60s told me that during that period, he had the feeling that Grothendieck was doing mathematics, so I quote his expression, in order to suffer. So I think, I don't think that. I don't think that Grothendieck wanted to suffer. But he certainly thought that you cannot do, we have to suffer. We have to accept suffering. We have to accept pain if we want to go forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Fantastic talk and fantastic discussion. I think we're going to have to finish, but if people want to ask any more questions, could you write to Assis or to Ricardo or to myself or to Jean-Yves? You have the emails, and then we'll pass it on to Laurent. Is that all right? And thank you very much. We have I think we can unmute for a moment just to give a big round of applause to Laurent. Thank you very much. Really fantastic talk. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just one thing about the questions. If someone has a further question, just write on the chat, okay? Then we send them to Laurent and we publish them as we did with Swinburne lecture.
Yeah.
But I think Assis has an announcement to make. Right?
Yes, I have an announcement to make. Thank you again, Professor Lafort, for this wonderful presentation. I want to take this opportunity again to introduce the next session of this webinar series. It will take place December 16th. And our next speaker will be Professor Graham Oppy from Monash University. He's one of the well-known philosophers of religion. He will be talking about the concept of God. So everyone is invited, and I hope to see all of you again. Okay. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.